I grew up in a place you could drive through in about 3 minutes if you caught the one traffic light on green. Cornfields, a gas station, a diner that smelled like burnt coffee, and a high school where football on Friday night was about as exciting as it got. I wasn't the smartest kid in that town, and I sure wasn't the fastest. I was just big, slow, and good at carrying heavy things without complaining too much. Turns out, that's exactly the sort of resume the draft board liked in the late 60s. Next thing I knew, I was standing on yellow footprints at boot camp, wondering how a boy who used to haul hay bales for a living ended up getting yelled at by a man with a hat big enough to shade the whole platoon. The first morning run just about killed me. The drill instructor blew his whistle, everybody took off like they were in the Olympics, and I lumbered along behind them, boots slapping the pavement, lungs on fire. "Move it, farm boy!" the DI screamed, jogging backward like it was nothing. "Aye, aye, Sergeant, I'm movin'," I wheezed, which only made everybody laugh harder. By the time I crossed the finish line, the rest of the platoon had been done long enough to start placing bets on whether I'd puke or pass out first. I never quit, though. That was the one thing I was stubborn about. Every run, every obstacle course, I was dead last, red-faced, shirt soaked through, legs shaking. But I finished. Some of the sharp guys from the city would run back a little just to jog the last stretch with me, clapping my shoulder, making a big show out of it. "Here he comes, world's slowest Marine, make a hole," one of them would shout. I'd flip 'em off without breaking stride, and they'd howl. Somewhere in all that joking, I stopped feeling like just the platoon idiot, and started feeling like their idiot. There's a difference. In the classroom stuff, I wasn't much better. Map reading looked like some cruel joke. The instructor laid out this big sheet with lines and tiny numbers and said, "Gentlemen, this is how you don't get lost." I mixed up my left and right more times than I'll admit. My buddy Reggie, a skinny kid from Philly who could talk his way out of anything, finally grabbed me one night in the barracks. "Look, man, your shooting's fine, but if you ever lead a patrol, we're gonna invade Canada by accident. Sit down." He spent half the night walking me through grid squares, azimuths, all that. I think I remembered about a third, but it meant something that he tried. There were things I was good at, though. I could clean a rifle until it looked like it came off the rack. I'd carry extra ammo without being asked, help guys shine boots, write letters for the ones who couldn't spell Mississippi without counting on their fingers. When somebody needed an extra pair of hands to haul sandbags or move a footlocker, they didn't call the fast guys. They called me. "Get the big boy, he's built for this," Reggie would yell, and I'd just shake my head and do it. Being useful felt good, even if my name on the roster was always followed by "needs improvement in PT." When the orders for Vietnam came, they posted the list on the bulletin board, and we all crowded around. Reggie ran his finger down the names and groaned. "Well, look at that. Jungle vacation for everybody." Then he saw mine. "Oh, man, you're in trouble. Charlie's never seen anyone run this slow. He's gonna think you're some kind of trap." The whole squad laughed, and so did I. But my stomach did a little flip just the same. A few weeks later, we stepped off the bird onto a hot, shimmering tarmac in Vietnam. The air smelled like jet fuel, damp earth, and something sweet rotting in the distance. We formed up with our gear digging into our shoulders, sun already baking the tops of our helmets. I remember looking at the hills and the tree lines, and thinking my biggest problem was still going to be keeping up on patrol, trying not to be last in line when somebody yelled, "Move out." I figured the worst that could happen
was I'd come home with sore feet and some stories about how I was always last in the run. Turned out the war had other plans for the slow guy.
Vietnam didn't look anything like the recruiting posters. Up in First Corps, it was all steep hills, red mud, and green that just swallowed you. The first time we stepped off the fire base and into real jungle, the air felt like soup. My boots sank with every step, rucksack straps biting into my shoulders. The lieutenant called it a routine patrol. My lungs called it attempted murder. I did what I always did, drifted toward the back of the line without meaning to. The point man cut the trail, the RTO stayed near the lieutenant, the machine gun team moved where they were told. Me? I was back where the squad leader put the extra weight. 2 ammo cans, spare radio batteries, sometimes a claymore or two hanging off my pack like Christmas ornaments. Every time I slipped in the mud and opened a gap, the platoon sergeant would growl into the handset. "Close it up back there. You trying to start your own war, slowpoke?" I'd huff and puff and slog faster, promising myself I'd keep that 15-meter interval if it killed me. It almost did, a couple times. You learn fast in the bush, or you don't get a chance to. First contact came one afternoon when the world was so quiet you could hear insects chewing. A couple of sharp cracks from the tree line, rounds snapping overhead, everyone dropping to a knee like somebody cut their strings. My heart jumped into my throat, but my hands did what they were supposed to. Hit the dirt, rifle up, eyes searching. Nobody got hit that time, just a few pot shots, and the lieutenant's voice low and steady on the radio, calling for a brief burst of fire, and then silence. Later, my legs shook so hard I could barely light a cigarette, but in the moment, I didn't freeze. I just listened and did what I was told. That stuck with me. Reggie was the one who taught me how to really walk that place. At night, under a poncho with the rain hammering on the plastic, he'd draw little diagrams in the dirt with a stick. "Look, big man, the point moves like this. The RTO's here. You stay where you can see at least 2 guys' boots and hear the gun team breathe. You don't stare at the ground, you scan. 2 steps looking ahead, 1 quick look where your foot's going. You keep your head up, not buried in your chest." He'd flick leeches off my sock like it was nothing, then lean back and grin. "Besides, if you go down, who's going to carry all our crap?" We both laughed, but he wasn't wrong. Little by little, it started to make sense. I learned the sound of the point man's hand signal snapping through the grass, the way the whole platoon flowed around a bend or a creek crossing. I learned how the jungle could go too quiet right before something bad, and how a bird suddenly exploding out of a tree could make 20 grown men hit the deck. I was still the last guy to finish a run when they made us do PT on the fire base, but out there on patrol, I just didn't stop. My pace never got graceful, but it got steady. 1 boot, then the other. Pack digging into my shoulders, sweat stinging my eyes, but I stayed on my feet. One evening, we came back from a long loop and heard the rumor before we even dropped our packs. Another company, not far from us, had walked right into a night ambush. Bad one. Lots of casualties. Guys spoke in low voices, traded half-true stories about flares and tracers, and men yelling for help in the rain. The lieutenant gathered us up, face serious in the fading light. "Stay sharp. They're pushing harder out there. Could be us next time." I remember feeling my legs aching from the day's march and thinking, as long as they kept moving, maybe it wouldn't be. I was still the slowest runner in the platoon, But by then I'd learned something important. As long as you kept putting one boot in front of the other, nobody left you behind. Monsoon nights in Vietnam had a way of making the world feel small. The sky came down in sheets, the ground turned to soup, and your whole universe shrank to the 6 inches in front of your face. That night we were moving between night positions near this little hamlet, more a smudge of thatch and shadow than a town. Reggie kept muttering, "Good sleeping weather, man. Nothing like a little rain to tuck you in." And a couple of guys chuckled, ponchos flapping, rifles slung low. My pack felt twice as heavy with the water soaking in. The only light was from our own red-lensed flashlights, blinking on and off like fireflies as squad leaders checked their men and then killed them again. We were wet, miserable, and bored, which, in Vietnam, was usually the part right before everything went to hell. It started with a pop up ahead, a sound just different enough from thunder to make your spine tighten. Then the night blew open. A flare kicked off, sudden white sun hanging in the sky, shadows slicing across the jungle. For half a second you could see everything, the dikes, the paddies, the dark line of trees, and that little hamlet crouched behind them. Then the machine gun opened up, long, hard bursts raking across our line. Tracers carved red and green lines through the rain. An RPG slammed into a tree off to our right, and the explosion showered us with wood, mud, and pieces of something I don't want to name. Men went down in the first volley. You could hear the change in their voices, jokes gone, replaced by this raw, surprised sound. The RTO crumpled near the lieutenant. The radio hit the mud with him, antenna twitching like it was still trying to call someone. I hit the ground like everybody else, heart in my throat, cheek pressed into cold water. I couldn't tell where the fire was coming from anymore, only that it was everywhere. Flashes in the tree line, bullets snapping low, somebody screaming for more ammo, someone else just screaming.
Somewhere in all that noise, I heard a voice I knew too well.
"Medic! I'm hit! Reggie's hit!" It was one of the guys from First Squad, his words tumbling over each other. Then Reggie himself, strain and disbelief twisted together. "Big man! I'm over here!" That cut through everything. I tried to raise my head, but another burst chewed up the dike in front of me, mud splashing into my face. The sergeant was yelling over us. "Fall back! Fall back to the tree line! Move! Move! Move!" Hands grabbed at my pack, dragging me, pushing me, the whole platoon trying to peel back before we got fully cut in half. I crawled and stumbled with them, knees slipping, boots sucked at by the mud, vision bouncing between the backs in front of me and the flares burning out overhead. When we finally tumbled into a shallow depression behind a thicker hedgerow, guys started firing back in organized bursts, the lieutenant shouting sectors, trying to make sense out of the chaos. For a moment I just lay there, chest heaving, ears ringing, feeling like every part of me was made of wet sand. Then I heard it again. Farther away now. Out there in that bright, deadly strip of rice paddy between us and where we'd been. "Big man! Hey! You forgot me!" Reggie's voice, thinned by distance and pain, but still Reggie. The gunfire hadn't stopped where he was. It was still chewing the night to pieces. Common sense said stay down, stay put. Be glad you'd made it to cover. But common sense has never had to listen to someone you know calling your name out in the rain.
Somebody down the line shouted what we were all thinking. "We can't get to him, he's too far out." You could hear the frustration in it, not cowardice, just math. Too much open ground, too much fire, not enough fools. I remember looking left and right at our little defensive position, guys pressed into the mud behind that hedgerow, rifles kicking, grenades arcing out into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit up their faces in short, white snapshots, all hard angles and clenched teeth. For a second, I just knelt there, gulping air, listening to the rain drum on my helmet, and Reggie's voice calling from somewhere out in the black. Then something in me snapped, like a gear locking into place. I didn't make a speech. I didn't tell anybody what I was about to do. I just pushed myself up and went over the dike. The first step out of cover felt like stepping off a roof. The night opened up. You could feel rounds cutting the air, hear them whining past your ears. I tried to run and immediately hit a slick patch, went down on one knee, splashing mud and water up into my face. For a second, I just stared at my hands, sinking into the paddy. Then I pushed off and kept moving, half running, half wading. Tracers reached over my head toward the tree line, but there were plenty coming back our way, too. Somebody behind me yelled my name, another voice cursed, but it all blurred into background noise. I had one thing in my head. Reggie was out there, and I was supposed to get to him. I almost tripped over him. He was lying twisted in the water, one leg at an ugly angle, poncho bunched up under his shoulders. His face was pale under the mud, eyes wide when they found me. "Took you long enough," he croaked, because even bleeding he couldn't resist a joke. I grabbed his web gear, tried to haul him up, and my arms reminded me I'd already carried half the platoon's ammunition that day. I shifted, got under his shoulders, and started dragging him backward, heels plowing 2 lines in the mud. Every foot felt like 10. My pack dug into my spine, my thighs burned, and every time a round cracked too close, I flinched but didn't stop. Guys at the hedgerow saw us coming and started shouting, reaching out, laying down extra fire. The last few yards they grabbed Reggie by his arms and rifle sling and yanked him in while I collapsed beside him, lungs on fire. I had maybe 3 breaths before I heard another cry, farther down the line. Not Reggie this time, someone from 2nd Squad, voice high and panicked, out in the dark where the field bowed toward the hamlet. A hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Don't you even think about it," the squad leader snarled. "You got lucky once." I shook him off without looking at him. My legs were already moving. It wasn't courage. It felt more like a bad habit. The second trip was worse. I knew exactly how far I had to go and how much it was going to hurt. My boots slipped, my calves screamed, something hot brushed past my arm, and I realized I'd been grazed when I felt the sting, but there wasn't time to check. I found the second man half submerged, trying to keep his rifle out of the water while blood seeped through his sleeve. By then I was so tired that when I pulled him toward me, I lost my balance and just collapsed on top of him. We lay there for a heartbeat, both of us panting in the rain. "You dead?" he gasped. "Not yet," I said, and forced myself up, muscles shaking like they were made of rubber. I don't remember deciding to make a 3rd trip, but I know I did, because later they told me about the other guy, the one I half carried, half shoved toward the dike, while my legs looked like they were going to fold. At some point, the enemy fire started to thin out, more of our guns talking than theirs. Somebody called in air or artillery. I just remember distant thumps and the sense that whatever was on the other side of the field was finally getting more than it gave. When it was over, really over, I tried to stand up and my knees just gave out. I sat there in the mud, chest heaving, hands trembling, surrounded by men staring at me like they weren't quite sure who I was. In my head, all I could think was that my legs had failed me again. By the time it was over, my legs were shaking so bad I couldn't stand. I thought that meant I'd failed somehow. Turns out that was the part everyone else kept talking about. The rain stopped before the questions did. The next morning my legs felt like they'd been swapped out for someone else's. Someone older, stiffer. We were back on the fire base. Half the platoon moving slow, the other half not moving at all. The lieutenant called me over to a makeshift table in a sandbagged corner. There was a legal pad there, a pen, and a captain from battalion who looked way too clean. "Walk me through what happened." the captain said. I tried. I talked about flares and tracers and mud up to my shins. I said I went out and got Reggie and then the other guys. He kept stopping me. No, what made you decide to leave cover? Did someone order you? I shrugged. I didn't know how to explain that there hadn't been a decision, not the kind he wanted to write down. My buddy was screaming, so I went and got him. It just seemed like somebody had to go, I finally said. He stared at me for a second, then nodded slowly and wrote something down that sounded a lot fancier than what I'd said. A couple of days later, I figured out why. The story had grown legs. Guys from weapons platoon nodded at me when I walked past. A clerk at S1 grinned and said, "Hey, you the farm boy who ran out 3 times." Someone else called me Captain America and laughed. That big dumb country kid ran out into a rice paddy 3 times under fire. That was the version making the rounds. Every time I heard it, it sounded less like what I remembered and more like something out of a comic book. Then they told me I was being put in for a medal. I saw the citation later, typed up all neat. Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, with complete disregard for his own safety, above and beyond the call of duty. Those were not words I used about myself. I knew what had been in my head. A lot of fear, a little anger, and a stubborn streak a mile wide. But you don't argue with a piece of paper that has a colonel's signature on the bottom. They choppered the worst of the wounded out to the hospital. The rest ended up in an aid station tent not far from us. I went to see them when I could. Reggie had his leg in a cast, hanging from some contraption that looked like a torture device. He tried to sit up when he saw me. "Didn't know you could move that fast, big man," he said, grinning, then winced as the movement jolted his leg. We both laughed, but there was something thick in my throat. His eyes softened. "I owe you one," he added quietly. "You'd have done it for me," I said, and we both knew it was true. Not everyone I dragged in was going to be okay. One kid lost most of the feeling in his arm. Another went home without part of his foot. And there was one we never reached at all, a guy from 2nd Squad whose voice I'd heard once in the chaos, and then never again. They found him when it got light, lying in the water where he'd fallen, eyes open to a sky that had finally stopped raining. Back at the company area, I sat on my bunk one evening and started cleaning my boots. Mud from that night had dried in the seams, caked around the eyelets. I chipped at it with a brush, watching flakes fall to the floor, and for a second it felt wrong to be scraping it away, like I was erasing something that mattered. Somebody stuck their head in the hooch and said, "There he is, the hero." I looked up, caught between laughing and telling them to get lost, but they were already gone, off to the poker game or the chow line. Hero. All I could see was a stretch of open field, lit by flares and tracers, and one man we never got back. They handed me a piece of metal and some fancy words about gallantry. All I could see was that field and the one man we never got back. These days the only running I do is when the dog gets out, and even then it's more of a determined shuffle. My knees talk to me every morning when I stand up out of the chair, little reminders that there was a time when they actually moved faster than a walk. I live back in a small town again, not the same one I grew up in, but close enough. One grocery store, a bar that smells like old beer and fryer grease, a VFW hall with dim lights and a jukebox that still thinks it's 1975. Most mornings I sit on the front porch with a cup of coffee, watching cars roll through the one stoplight in town. When it rains hard, I can't help noticing the way the water runs down the street in little streams and how the headlights smear through it. Part of me goes right back to that night in Vietnam, even if the only thing moving fast now is the weather. Every so often we have a reunion, or something close to it. Not everyone can travel, not everyone wants to, but a handful of us find our way to the same corner of a hotel bar or the back room at the VA. The hair is grey or gone, the bellies are bigger, but when we start telling stories, you can still see the kids underneath. Someone always mentions that night in the rain. "You remember when Big Man here went charging out into that paddy like his head was on fire?" one of them will say, clapping me on the shoulder. The younger folks, sons, daughters, a couple of grandkids, turn and look at me like I'm about to launch into some epic war movie. I usually just shrug and give them the short version. "I was too dumb to stay down," I say. "There were guys screaming for help. I just went and got 'em." They laugh, shake their heads, call me crazy in that admiring way. They don't need to hear about the part where my legs almost gave out, or the one voice we didn't answer in time. That belongs to me and the men who were there. I was flipping channels one night not long ago and landed on a Vietnam documentary. I almost kept going. Most of the time I'd rather watch a ball game or some fishing show, but the scene on the screen stopped my thumb. It was grainy footage of a night firefight in a paddy, flares drifting down, tracers scratching lines across the dark, silhouettes pressed into mud. It wasn't my unit, not my battle, but it might as well have been. The narrator was talking about strategy, about tactics, about the broader war. I wasn't listening. I was busy looking at one blurry figure hauling another through the water, thinking, yeah, I know exactly how that felt in his shoulders. When the show cut to a commercial, I muted the TV and just listened to the rain starting up outside, tapping a rhythm on the roof I knew by heart. I've been to the wall in DC once. That was enough. I thought I was prepared because I'd seen pictures, read about it, talked to guys who'd gone before. I wasn't. Walking up to that black stone, seeing it stretch and stretch, feeling the temperature change when you step into the shadow of it, it hits you different when you know some of those names aren't just history. They're people who called you slowpoke and stole the raisins out of your sea rations. I found the sections for our year and our unit, stood there with my fingers on a line of letters that used to be faces in the rain. Reggie made it home, messed up leg and all. The one from 2nd Squad, the one we never reached, he was there in that stone. I stood there so long my back started to ache, but my feet wouldn't move. Eventually my wife touched my elbow and said we should go get some water. On the way back to the hotel, I joked that my knees weren't made for all that walking. She smiled, but she saw the part that wasn't a joke. If you saw me now, standing in line at the grocery store or hobbling down the sidewalk with a bag of dog food, you wouldn't think war hero. You'd think, there's an old guy who ought to sit down more. And that's fine. That's about right. People who know a little piece of the story like to say I was brave that night. I've heard the word hero more times than I'm comfortable with. The truth is, I don't remember feeling brave. I remember being scared, confused, and too stubborn to stay where it was safe when someone I knew was out there yelling my name. I keep wondering, even after all this time, why I got to come home and live long enough to have bad knees and a mortgage and grandkids when other men so much sharper and faster never got past 20. There's no neat answer to that, no sentence that ties it up with a bow. So when I tell it now, I try to be honest. I tell folks I was the slowest runner in my platoon. That's still true. I never learned to fly through those morning runs, never broke any training records, but I also tell them that on one ugly night in a Vietnamese rice field, those same slow legs just kept going when they should have quit. Not because I was special, but because stopping just wasn't something I knew how to do. People like to say I was brave that night. Truth is, I just kept going when smarter men might have stayed put. I was the slowest runner in the platoon. Maybe that's why I never learned when you're supposed to stop.
If you've made it this far, thank you. These stories take time to tell, and even longer to understand. You've just walked through the memories of men who were never supposed to be remembered. If their voices meant something to you, if even one line stayed behind when the sound faded. Don't let it disappear. Give this video a like, share it with someone who still believes history belongs to the living, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. Every episode here is another page, another life, another truth pulled out of the smoke. Drop a comment too, not for the algorithm, but for the conversation. Tell me what you felt, or what you remember hearing from your own fathers, grandfathers, uncles, or friends. That's how these memories stay alive. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's keep turning the pages together.